Hi, this is Dave from Online Casino HQ, and today we're joined by Henry McLean from 4ThePlayer. Thank you for joining us, Henry.
No problem at all. Thanks for inviting me.
And so basically, before we start, could you give us a brief background of the company 4ThePlayer and how it came into being?
Sure. So we formed 4ThePlayer, about 6 years ago now. Time really does fly. Basically, previously, I worked with the other founders in a company called Ash Gaming that I know some of you guys will know well. And we all then worked at Playtech after we sold Ash Gaming and kind of formed 4ThePlayer again to kind of go back to doing a startup because we thought there was kind of like a need in the industry for something a bit different, a kind of a game supplier that kind of thought about the player a bit more and kind of looked at things slightly differently to all the other game providers out there.
Excellent. And so basically, when you started in 2018, what was the first game that you actually published, and who was it distributed to? Which channels?
Yeah, so our first game was 9K Yeti. Still actually one of our top performers today. We've now done a few more Yeti games, and that one went live via Idrisil. We were on the first Idrisil Masters Partners, which is like their third-party developer program. And the great thing about that is we instantly got really good traction because it used Idrisil's integrations.
Excellent. And so I've noticed that when you first launched those 6 years ago, you worked quite closely with affiliate sites as well, didn't you, to get your name out there? And what was the initial reception from players of those and visitors from those affiliate communities that you were basically being published out on?
Some of them were slightly confused about the direct approach. They weren't used to game developers proactively getting in touch with them and saying, can we talk to you? Can we treat you almost like a casino and kind of demo everything to you? But a lot of them I already knew from my previous days at Playtech and Ash Gaming. So it was kind of like, I'm doing this now. But there was also lots of outreach to kind of new markets and new kind of affiliates. But they loved it. The reaction has been really, really positive because we're doing things slightly differently and we really care, which I think hopefully you can see in our games.
But when I first came across you, when I was working for Casino Meister, you've had a very visual presence on the forum. Every time you've released a game as well, you've actually interacted with the forum community as well, which I think has proven to be quite a good strategy as well for a game developer to follow.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a fun strategy because I'm sure you can imagine you get all sorts of inquiries and all sorts of questions. But at the end of the day, they're our customers, and also we make games for them, so we can learn a lot from them as well. So I do spend a lot of time replying to players wherever they are online, whether it's a website comment, whether it's a forum, whether it's an email, or even social media, to kind of explain kind of like what they think about the game and also to tell them about the game.
No, I think as a player, I think that's quite important. Like we've seen it from Leander. They Inferno, that they did that with community input and relaxed gaming. They've with Casino Grounds, I think they did that game, and I think it generates quite a lot of buzz. And it's from a player's perspective, it's interesting as well to kind of get an idea of the behind the scenes stuff, and certainly if you're able to give an input about what you like in a game and stuff. I just think I think it's like a win-win actually. I guess my next question would be, like, you say that 4ThePlayer is different, and you maybe even faced a bit of confusion about your approach and stuff. Like, what is it that you think makes you different? Like, what is it that's your USP from to the player?
Sure. So the big difference is each game's got a purpose. So a lot of game developers we found, especially maybe not so much now, but when we launched, it was more kind of turn the handle, create a game, fill a roadmap, tick. And it was kind of like they kind of forgotten the purpose. It's about fun and entertainment. And each game we make has got a purpose. And we think, why are we making this game? And it almost has a concept to kind of like, we want to achieve this task when we create the game. So each game's kind of got a reason to be rather than just being created. And I think players really know this as well. So like, we're creating this game to achieve this, or this game to this market. It's not just doing it to tick a box. We also create a lot less games. Which is one other thing.
So can you give like you say like it fills a purpose or whatever? Can you give like an example of like what do you mean by that?
Sure. Let me think. So 4 Fantastic Fish is a great example. a customer. So a lot of our kind of game creation, when we speak to our customers, will say, well, what do you like? What's going well? And obviously there was a massive fishing boom. God knows where the idea of fish slots came from. Obviously there was one big provider, but suddenly it was a huge thing. So we were like, okay, we'll create a fishing game because it's a big trend. And we wanted to do it differently and with the player in mind. So thought, what's the pain point in fishing games? Looked on forums, spoke to players, spoke to casinos, and they all said the same thing. Everyone hates the fact that you need to collect, that you need the cash in a certain part of the game. It's just a tease. So we thought, let's create something different and create this thing we call moneyways, which is basically if you get the cash on the wheels and it's part of a ways win, you win what you see. There's no need for a fisherman, there's no collect, nothing like that. You don't need it in a bonus round. You just win the cash, which has really simplified the process, and players have connected with that and gone, okay, I get it. And that was the purpose behind that game, is to make a easier to understand and a kind of fairer fishing game that's done really well.
Yeah, and as someone that just utterly despises fish games, really, just because I mean, for the reasons you mentioned, I just think they're quite boring, having to look out for a single collector symbol in the feature and stuff. That's quite interesting. And this is it was Moneyways, you said, is the mechanic.
Yeah, Moneyways is the mechanic. So they work so well. We've done it in a few now.
So I was going to ask later about mechanics, but this seems like a good time as ever. So I was looking. Obviously, you have where are my notes? The ones I jotted down. You have like plus ways, dual spin, double max, and now Moneyways, I assume. So like from my perspective, it's probably a lot more technologically difficult to put together a mechanic than it is like a theme or whatever. So let's say that you have a meeting at 4ThePlayer and you say, okay, we want to get a new mechanic up this year. How do you what's involved with creating it? Obviously since the Megaways engine, was kind of released, it's kind of gone a bit crazy. I think before that we had like the 243 ways to win, 1024 for a 98, and now it's kind of like you've just got so many different things. So how do you deal with that?
Sure. So the first thing we always do is think about why we're creating the game. So what we're doing here? So rather than just thinking, let's create a cool mechanic, we think about what's the entertainment factor here, or who we're targeting, and why we're creating it. So for example, 1K Yeti is a good example of this. We created a Yeti Rush, which is like a mechanic where basically you've got a sliding wall that goes from right to left. But the cool thing is it keeps going and going and going. But with that one, we wanted a really simple mechanic. So we wanted something that players would understand that might not be so experienced with slots. So like, let's kind of go with the stack wild because that makes sense. We then thought, well, what would be bad about this mechanic and why wouldn't it be good? So we then thought, well, the annoying thing would be is if it gets to the end and just sits there, you'll just get dead spins and you'll be really annoyed. So we thought, right, let's fix that. Let's make it spin all the way around and basically keep kind of iterating and iterating and iterating. So we kind of got to an idea that we think is good enough. And we then bounce it around internally forever and go, and we actually have like a voting system. So we grade stuff internally and go, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of this? We then create like a pitch deck and I'll go and present it to our platform partners, some of our large customers and say, right, what do you think of this? And some of them will go, that's amazing, I really want it. Some will go, what about this? And then we kind of take it back in-house and then see what happens in the final game.
And are there regulatory issues with new mechanics? Do you have to get them certified even like on its own from the game?
No. So everything in the game gets certified anyway. So everything in the game must meet regulatory in each of the markets we're in, and then the game gets tested and certified, and we get a cert for each market it's in. But it is a growing challenge because we're in so many global regulated markets. So we try and make one version of the game that's compliant in every market.
Well, yeah. I was about to ask because obviously you're in the UK, you're in some US, New Jersey, I think, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
And Michigan, perhaps.
Yep.
And yeah, so I know that in the UK, at least I think there's regulations on you can't even show certain like the near misses. I think they regulate that, right? Like. So
I think what you mean is one about you can't have wins below your stake. That's the one that recently came. You can't wins below your stake. You can't celebrate wins below your stake.
Apologies. Oh, yeah.
So what I mean is basically, so you can't. So if you're spinning on £1 and you get a win for 40p, you can't go big win and make all the noise and all that stuff. That was a change recently. Generally, we never did that anyway. And also, like I said, we try and where possible make one version of the game that's compliant in all markets from day one.
Okay, so yeah, because otherwise it seems like it would just be a legal nightmare trying to. I mean, surely it is anyway. No, trying to figure out, especially with the UK's ever-changing, ever-changing regulations. So, I mean, do you have like a legal team? Like, how do you like navigate it and make sure that you're not breaking any obscure
We have
rule?
a big internal team that look at everything, and we're fully up to date on all the compliance and the regulation and all the changing regulation. But then also it's fully independently tested and certified and verified as well. So basically, when the way the process is, we create the game then goes to a test house, and they then test it against all the different regulations. Some regulations quicker than others. So, for example, Greece takes much longer. So generally, a Greece certificate will pop out about 4 weeks from the normal release. And then once you get the cert, it's okay in that market. But sometimes they'll come back and say, you've got to tweak this on the pay table. And some of the regulators also ask questions. Like, we work closely with Veikkaus, which is the Finnish government lottery organisation, and their regulator often asks questions about game rules, or can you please explain this mechanic, or explain how this works? And then we have to explain this, and they go, okay, we're happy, and then you get a certificate.
I think that, even for me, that's quite surprising. I've been in the industry for almost a decade, so I would assume normal players would be quite surprised by that. That, I think a lot of players just kind of assume you develop the game, send it off, get like a stamp and it's good to go kind of thing.
I wish it was that
easy. It's quite interesting that, some regulators even like come back to you and say, you have to change things with the pay tape. Have they ever, outright refused? Are there?
No, we're really lucky that we're really experienced, so we know what we're doing. So by the time we get a game to a regulator, we're confident that it will pass, and it will go through. So it's just a matter of ticking the box, getting the certificate, and getting it live. Mm-hmm. But I do hear of other game developers that have actually gone to had games tested, and they're like, sorry, this doesn't comply with regulation, this can't go live. But no, 4ThePlayer, I've never had that challenge.
And are there any like themes you have to stay away from like not necessarily from like an ethical point of view, but from a regulatory point of view?
There's a few in the UK. So religions are generally a no-no. Sexual prowess is a no-no in the UK as well. So you can't say that gambling will make you more sexually appealing, which is quite kind of a hangover from old kind of years ago. And obviously the big one is responsible gaming and child appeal. So we make sure all our games are fully adult and kind of don't have that as well.
But that kind of brings me back to, from what you've been discussing, the initial challenges that you faced when you actually set up 4ThePlayer. Now, obviously, the three of you, Chris, Andrew, and yourself, were experienced. You have the experience from Ash Gaming, and presumably you worked for or with Playtech when they took over Ash Gaming initially. How easy or hard is it to actually set up a game studio? Because not only do you need the experience and the creative prowess as well, obviously you need capital, but you need to be able to distribute your games as well. So you need to know or have contacts with a distribution partner to get it actually out on those online casinos, so they showcase it. But what steps did you have to follow to actually get 4ThePlayer off the ground and up and running?
Sure. So the first thing you need to do is obviously you need to have the contacts and have the industry experience. So you can't just kind of turn up at a platform and say, I want to integrate, except like, well, who are you? Why would you do this? And funny enough, I actually know people that have said to me, I approached one of your platform partners and they said, sorry, no, we won't work with anyone that kind of hasn't got the experience. So we were lucky that we got the experience. So when we approached, Idrisil was the first one, Idrisil Masters, and we approached them and said, can we do a game, put a game on you? That was 9K Yeti. And they said yes. We then had to go to customers and actually sell the game. So they might have Idrisil, but they might not take every Idrisil game. So you then have to do a sales process and speak to all the big casinos out there, like we're big casino groups, and say, we're doing this, will you take the game? And luckily, everyone was like, yes, this sounds really exciting, this is something different, and really kind of bought into the 4ThePlayer story and kind of how we're doing things differently. And it kind of went from there. And then we then had Relax, so we then signed up with another platform. So we did Relax and Idrisil. We made another slightly different decision to most game developers, that we didn't do a platform. So we basically focused on, one, what we really enjoyed, which is making games. And two, it's a bit of a tech nightmare having a platform. like we spoke about earlier, and kind of like certification, you have to certify the platform as well. And then every time regulation changes, you need to change your platform and make sure it's certified, etc. So we thought, to start with, let's keep it simple. Let's go on a proven tech stack, which is Digital and Relax, and kind of go from there. So we then went live with those two, and then about 2 or 3 years ago, we then did Gaming Realms as well. So we're now on 3 platforms. That one's for the US, because we started our US journey, and Gaming Realms are really well distributed out there. So we thought, let's kind of go with them, because we can then use their integrations into casinos.
Yeah, because
does that kind of fully answer the question?
It does, yes. Because I know someone in the industry that worked with Leander Games, I believe it was, on developing a slot. I think the slot's called Afterlife Inferno. And he said it was very enjoyable, but it took quite a lot of money as well to get that game developed. And then it's a case of actually generating revenue once a game's published. A lot of people probably watching this will think, oh, you've got a game out, it's going to be making lots of money. That's not the case at all, is it? That's
not how it works at all. That's part, getting the game live is part of the journey.
Yeah.
The rest of it is marketing. And also having a good game. Like, we often say that making a game is an art form, because you can make the best game possible, but if it hasn't got all the right ingredients and it doesn't work, it will never kind of have a success. And also, you never know what's going to be a success. So you can put all the right ingredients in and kind of give it all the attention and make the best game that you think in the world, but some of them just don't resonate. So yeah, getting it live is only part of the story.
Well, I was just going to come back because there's one of your games which is very interesting to me. Sure. 10x Rewind.
Yep.
And I was introduced to this by watching a streamer was playing it, and it took my head quite a while to even get it took a while to even get my head around how it works, because it's such a so correct me if I'm wrong. So if you trigger the bonus, it doesn't matter what's happened in the last. It doesn't matter how much money you've won or lost. The last 10 spins are then replayed.
Yep, it then rewinds time and goes back and plays the 10 spins again, and you win what you won again.
So, I mean, to me, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. Number one, to even try and understand, but to try and develop that with all the regulatory, the technical. So, I mean, could you just walk us through that a little bit about, how it works and challenges and whatever?
Sure. So probably the first thing to say is we have internally an innovation meter. We basically say how innovative is this idea, and we try and get a balance between kind of rewind time ideas that are really far out there and your kind of 9K Yetis that are more classic but with a twist. And this is definitely the most furthest out there idea. Probably one of the fun things was pitching it to customers. Like you said, because you go to these meetings face to face, you sit in their office, you go, I'm going to show you the latest game, and you start saying it goes backwards, and they're like, what? Well, why does it do that? But everyone loved it. Everyone thought it was a great idea because it's different, and we're not afraid to try things. Unfortunately, it didn't resonate as well as we wanted it to, because I think it kind of maybe was slightly too on the innovative out their side. But we learned from it. We learned what was fun, what was different, and what players did enjoy from it. And have taken that into other games. But yeah, the actual kind of game rewind time, 10 times rewind, hasn't actually done as well. It isn't one of our top performers, shall I say.
Interesting. I mean, I'm genuinely sad to hear that, because I think as a player and obviously working in the industry, it is refreshing to see these, even if they're some players will prefer to stick to the classic 3x5 kind of format with 10 pay lines. But I think where we've seen so much regurgitation of mega ways formats and like the fishing games is a classic example. I think it's probably back to real-time gaming, not RTG, but with their fishing frenzy, right? And now it's just kind of exploded, where every developer's putting out multiple variations in these respin rounds, and it gets to a point where it's just so overly saturated. Same with the book games. And I think that's, from a player, I would think that's such a good USP to go after for a developer, just because so many they're so bored of what has been released the last couple of years. Does that factor into your roadmap plans and stuff? And
Sure. So it's interesting you say that because actually a lot of players think on the opposite side. A lot of players think I want something I'm familiar with, something I enjoy, and something I know. It'd be like when you go to your local corner shop and buy a chocolate bar. Do you always buy the same one that you know you're going to like, or do you try something different?
It's true, yeah.
Well, yep, you're going to buy a Mars bar or Dairy Milk. So I know
Yeah.
that one. It's nice. So it's often the same now. So like I think players go through different kind of like series, and at the moment the players are definitely going with stick to what I know and enjoy. And funny enough, we heard from one of our big tier one customers that does player surveys, and familiarity was actually one of the top ranking things players were looking for. So when they open a game, they kind of know what's going to happen. There might be something different. There's an innovative twist or something fun, but there's that reassurance. Oh, I know what that is. And going back to your point earlier, Dave, like about the game not just launching. So part of the challenge is getting the players to actually kind of make that first click. And by doing something familiar like a fishing game, the conversion rate on the icon's much higher because the player's going to go, fishing, I'm familiar with that click. Whereas with a rewind time, they'll be like, what's this time thing about? Some might click it out of curiosity, but the majority of players are more likely to click on a fishing game. So yeah.
So how do you combat that in future? You know, presumably you want to try new mechanics again, like like the rewind time, but maybe a bit simpler. So like how do you manage what you just told me about players wanting familiarity, but balance it with being creative and intuitive?
So like I said about Moneyway, so basically we think about how we can improve things, what fun twists. So we did 4 Fantastic Fish in Egypt, which is a really fun twist. So it's basically Moneyways and mashed up with fishing in Egypt, which hadn't been done before. And then we also brought in new features. So brought in like a sarcophagus symbol, which is a nightmare to spell. And kind of do things like twists like that. So we now kind of see it about, let's kind of do something that players are familiar with, will love and enjoy, but also put a little for the player twist or stamp on it. And now quite often when I'm talking to players, they're like, oh, what's the twist in this one? What have you done differently? And there's always something that we've done that's kind of got our identity on it.
And have you noticed? Because I know that a long time ago I was speaking to a developer, and they were talking about the challenges of entering the Asian market, for example, and what they ended up doing was simply reskinning a lot of their games with a kind of cliche Asian theme, like Kaishen or the Gods of Wealth, all that stuff. Like how do you deal with different markets and you probably don't want to give away your entire market research plans, but like what are some basic differences you notice between the US and Europe, for example? Or
yeah, so we don't do reskins. Every game's unique and has got a purpose. Like I said, we don't do that. We might do one if it's customer specific. So, for example, if it's a customer branded version of a game, but otherwise every game is unique. And the focus for us is on regulated markets. So we look at UK, Sweden, America. And there are, like you said, lots of nuances between the markets, but we think that a good game is a good game, and generally, broadly speaking, will appeal in most markets. There are different nuances. Let me think of some. So, for example, in America, online gaming's only been recently legal, so the players aren't as advanced as they might be in UK and Europe. So some of the players will kind of want a more straightforward slots, the stuff they might have seen in Vegas and Caesar's Palace, or those kind of the things that they're kind of more familiar with. So we kind of have stripped things back and kind of made the games that might appeal more in that market, and they have, or themes that might index better in that market. So a good example is 4 Fantastic Lobsters, which is our 4 Fantastic Fish series, but a lobster variant that we made with an American twist. So theme-wise, we thought lobsters might resonate better in America because there's lots of kind of lobster restaurants, and thematically it fits, and that went down well. We also put in a pickle-in feature, because pickle wins are huge in America. Again, it goes back to retail, your kind of big screen, kind of pick all your feature kind of thing. And again, it resonated well. And that's our top game in the US. So I think you can kind of make these kind of small little changes to that market. But saying that, the game does really well in UK and Europe as well. So if you're smart, you can kind of make a game that does work everywhere. But kind of maybe think of kind of one main market and then kind of look where else it could fit.
Got something to ask, really.
Sure.
20 years ago, or thereabouts, 25 years ago, nearly, when I started out in the industry, I was with Ladbrokes, and back then it was always one operator, one software provider. You didn't have what all players are blessed with now, all these casinos with multiple software providers providing the games. So my question is really, obviously, for a gaming studio to survive and grow in this industry, to bring in revenue, players need to be able to find their games and play their games for revenue to be generated. So if you release a game, how do you ensure that the operators that take your game on the platform that it's on, how do you ensure that your game is pushed sufficiently within the casino lobby? So one, that players get to know about it, first of all, and then two, it goes back to what you said about familiarity of the games. I kind of like get where you're coming from there, because perfect example, these two for free payline games, like the Thunderstruck 2 engine, for example, that's been used countless times, with Immortal Romance being the most popular one. But these games are proven popular, so I understand that if people are used to that type of game, they'll continue to play it, even if it's a new one. So how does a new studio go about launching and then getting enough eyeballs on page, as it were, for people to actually play the game so they can continue to develop games?
Good question. Basically, that's one of the hardest parts of running a game studio. Like you said, I've been in the industry nearly 20 years myself now as well. And when I went back to Ash Gaming all those years ago, there was us and like one or two other independents. They weren't the 500 odd game developers there are now. They're all fighting for the position. So the big thing that we do is we kind of sell the story of the game, and we talk about the games early on, and work closely with affiliates, streamers, players to kind of drive demand and kind of create the story of the game. But in terms of positioning on the casino, if there was a solution that you had great positioning for every game, I'd be a multi-millionaire by now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is no guarantees. That's their business. So the casino runs their business, they run their lobby, and it's up to them where they put stuff. We do exclusive launches, so you might have seen generally 2 weeks before one of our games go live.
Have done recent Justice.
Yes, we have. Yeah, we have. And we generally do that. So we'll choose one key partner. Nowadays, we're in a lucky position where they come to us and say, "What can we have?" And it's like, "Okay, wait there. We kind of haven't got any more to offer at the moment." And then basically say to them, "Well, what can you offer us from a marketing point of view? What can you do? How can you push and position this title in exchange for this 2 weeks before anyone else?" And that works really well. But then I think, going back to what I said earlier, we kind of drive demand, and that works as well. So players, when we launch the game, players hopefully know about the game, play the game, and then the casinos see that. And a lot of the casinos manage their lobbies based on performance. So if a game performs, it stays in the lobby. And we're in a good place that our games do perform. Our games are popular, and often will stay in that lobby. But it is really hard. So on some casinos, you'll stay on the homepage for 3 days. You then go into more slots or other slots, and it's just like, it's about trying to make those 3 days a success, and try and make sure it gets some day in the sun. Otherwise, the game just won't perform.
It's just mad, isn't it? You think how we were 20 years ago, where there were only a handful of developers.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, but now there are in excess of 20,000 slot games, for example, online. Probably heading nearer 30,000 than 20,000, and it's so competitive now to actually get out there. And I can see I can understand your strategy from when you first launched, actually going out into affiliate communities and forums, etc. So you are actually getting your name out there yourself. So you're actually doing a lot of the marketing, running yourself to basically, I guess, once the casinos that take your platform see that you're getting out there and there's interest from players, they're going to push your games to the forefront, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And they also know there's a full marketing strategy around each game. So when we launch the game, that's the beginning of the marketing. Well, that's not the beginning. That's kind of the middle bit of the marketing. And there's always like another 2 months of what happens then and how you kind of keep the game exciting, keep people playing it if they're enjoying it. And casinos know that as well. So when they launch one of our titles, it's not launch it and hope it works. We kind of put everything possible to make it work and make it a success for the players.
Do you ever, if you release a game and, it doesn't do as well as you'd hoped, do you ever I'm not sure this is the right word to use, but do you ever edit it, like go back and if so, presumably it has to be fully recertified, or it's like a partial thing? How does that work?
So we haven't with this. We've made a small tweak, like made one or two small tweaks to things where players weren't understanding things. But generally, you're right. You have to recertify it, and recertifying a game post launch is a nightmare because it has to. You basically have to get the new game recertified, get the certificates out, and then it becomes quite a long process. So generally, we won't. Plus, also, it's very hard that once a player doesn't like a game, to get a player to try a game again, they're quite stubborn players. So they'll be like, "Oh, I don't like that game." So you're probably better focusing on something that will work rather than trying to fix something that didn't work. And just taking learnings from it, because every day is a school day. And we're big believers in that even if it isn't your most successful title, you can learn about what players did enjoy, what they didn't enjoy, and kind of feed that all into your next title.
Which I guess is why you've, is it four Yeti games you have now?
So we have 9K Yeti, we have 90K Yeti, we have 1K Yeti. So there's 3 Yetis. And then there's seasonal skins within them all.
Okay, and that's your most popular game, I assume?
It's one of. So the most popular is actually 4 Fantastic Fish in the fishing series. But the Yeti series does really well as well. So we thought it kind of made sense to work on that.
I guess, like, for me, that, when you first came onto the scene, I think it was the Yeti. I would probably associate the word Yeti with your company now. If I just heard Yeti,
people do say, "Oh, you're the Yeti people." I'm like, "Yeah, we are Yeti." It's quite one of our identities.
So, do you have any, non-classified big plans for the Yeti? Is he making any exciting appearances?
Yeah, there's actually potentially another Yeti game coming in Q1. We're kind of working on the idea now, but yeah, Yeti will always kind of keep popping back. The good thing about the Yeti games is players know what to expect. So when we first made our first slot, it was basically trying to find a game that players know what they're looking for. Because a lot of games now kind of are quite confusing, and that's almost USP of some studios. That it's like kind of like 100 million miles an hour. You're like, what's going on? Lots of noise. And we wanted, no, let's make things straightforward and simple where you know what you're looking for. And you're looking for the Yeti and you want to find the Yeti to win big. So that kind of travels throughout all the Yeti games. So he will be back at some point, probably in Q1 next year.
Cool. And while we're talking about specific games, 5K Goldmine, which is, I believe, your first game to have a progressive jackpot in it. But what's interesting is that it's not your network, is it? It's Relax's.
Yeah, it's the Relax Dream Drop.
So how does that? Let me ask first of all, like, what does it take to build a progressive game? I would assume it's a million times more complex. But have you kind of offset a lot of that by using a different provider's network, and what goes into it?
Yeah, so we wanted to do jackpots. Progressive jackpots are really cool. They drive lots of volume because some players really enjoy the fact you can win such a huge amount of money on any spin. So we kind of thought about what's the best way to do it. And Relax had just thought about, they just released their Dream Drop, which is an amazing progressive jackpot network. And I'm not sure if you've actually played it, but the way it works mathematically is really clever. So when it goes back to hot again, and it basically pops very regularly. So they've kind of balanced maths behind the scenes really well. So that kind of drawed us in, and we were like, that seems really cool, let's do that. And then we thought, let's try and create something slightly different. So create the board game mechanic where you kind of like you're moving around the side of the game. And then 5K Goldmine Dream Drop was born. And it kind of amazingly, within the first day and a half, someone won the Dream Drop on it. Which really? Was, we were like, that's amazing, but it could have been a week after launch. Because then obviously, like, the players all kind of drop off it because the jackpot's gone.
Yeah.
But it was great. It was really, really exciting to have a player win that kind of money on one of our games. And like you said, we could never have done that without the Relax Dream Drop. We've actually, I don't know if I've announced it yet, but we've actually got a new Dream Drop game coming in the works. So you might be the first guys to hear that. That's 4 Fantastic Fish Gold Dream Drop. That's coming later this year.
So the creative process from start to finish, how did you come up with the concept for a game in the first place? And obviously you guys are relying on your previous experience working for Ash Gaming, etc. But from start to finish, how does a game get developed? What is the actual process that's involved?
Sure. So we spend a lot of time playing games. Every week we play probably 30 or 40 games on a Friday, and basically
Oh,
everything's
wow.
been released. And kind of like I curate a list of all the games that have been released that we think are interesting, and then we play through them, write notes, and kind of think, what can we learn from this? What's doing well? And we also have a massive ideas bank internally, and kind of go, well, what about if a wild did this? What about if a scatter did this? Or when we're playing and we find something really jarring, we write it down and go, well, how can we fix that? What can we do differently? So an example is in the Gigablocks games. When we did our first Gigablocks, the thing we found really annoying with Gigablocks is you didn't see many of them because they're so massive. They're really high paying. So quite often on traditional Gigablocks games, you didn't see them. And we were like, well, what's the point in that? So we were like, how can we fix it? So then the idea for 90k Yeti Gigablocks was born because we wanted a Gigablocks game where you could see them. So we fixed that by putting blocker symbols in that could then be smashed and turned into Gigablocks. So often it kind of starts with a pain point or something that we can fix or resolve, but also something that we think is fun. So Two Gods was a good example of something we thought was quite cool. Again, it might not have resonated so well, but 2 different spin buttons and the player could choose which god they wanted and spinning. We thought that was cool and different. So often that's just an idea as well. Or regulation changes. So, and one good example is 3 Lucky Witches or 3 Lucky Leprechauns. With the kind of getting rid of autoplay and getting rid of bonus buy. Some players won't see a bonus, and the journey to get a bonus in the UK can be really painful because quite often it's 1 in 200, 1 in 300 feature frequency.
Yeah.
So we thought, right, let's fix that. Let's create a game with a 1 in 75 feature frequency. So that's where that kind of idea came from. We thought, right, and how do we make a game around this?
But presumably the variance is lower than if that's the case, if the bonus is being hit more often.
Yeah, it's 1 in 75 is the average feature frequency, and it's medium to high volatility. We've done it. So on the 3 Lucky Leprechauns, there's a ladder you climb up.
Yeah.
You've got your big prize at the top. Quite often, obviously, you'll kind of go in the middle. And then on 3 Lucky Witches, you've got a wheel that spins, and you kind of move your way into the middle of the wheel to win the most money.
Yeah, so the thing is, when I used to play, I used to hate it I like the higher variant slot games, and I used to hate it. If you get a bonus, you've done about 200, 300 spins to get it.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't pay out anything. It's horrible. But the high volatile games, like Playtech, Great Blue, used to love it because if that paid out, it would be really, really good. But yeah, that's just from my own perspective as a player.
One of the things you've mentioned a few times, Henry. You certainly imply it. You take more of a quality over quantity approach.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think anyone could see, looking at your game library, you have a comparatively small selection of games compared to a lot of developers. And I guess that's kind of your niche, right? Like, not churning out, as you said, reskins or just getting something out there for the sake of it. Do you think like that's held you back at all? Like, is that something you've has been a struggle? And I think it's in 6 years you're not shaking your head, so that's probably a sufficient answer. But for 6 years to kind of stick to that principle, it must prove that it's working and stuff. So to actually ask a question,
sure.
What is the kind of like the goal for the next couple of years? Do you have any specific like direction you're pivoting towards with themes or mechanics or anything?
Sure. So to answer the first part, yeah, we're definitely quality over a quantity. We kind of see ourselves as boutique, kind of like your high end kind of handbag store rather than your Asda. There are Asda providers out there that just churn out games. And they take the view that if they churn out games, they'll be in the casino homepage every day because there's a new title. So that's a different strategy that we don't have. Whereas people always go to the high-end stores and buy those designer handbags because it's different, it's cool, and it's a different product. So I think there's definitely space for both types of providers. But as will always be quality over quantity. Normally kind of 9-10 titles a year maximum. Maybe 1 or 2 more if we're doing, because we've got retail as well now. So we have our games in pubs and clubs. So there's a few more in there, but generally it's always about kind of 10 titles a year. And then in terms of what we've got planned, lots and lots planned. Like I mentioned, there's more going into retail. So we've currently got 2 games in retail, which are doing really well. That's a deal we did with Reflex that's worked great. So yeah, so if you're in your local pub, do look on the machine. You might find 4 Fantastic Fish or 9K Yeti, which is great.
Cool.
I always love it when I'm in a random pub. I go, oh, that's my game, and go and lose some money to myself.
Well, I was going to ask, do you ever play your own games online?
Always.
Like for real money.
Definitely. One of the first things I do when our games go live is deposit and have a long session and experience it for myself. Because when you're developing a game, we play with lots of different math models. We've got math tools, and we do loads of testing of the math before it's released. And you always have to say to yourself, pretend this is real money, and kind of as if it was the real experience. But it's not until you play something for real money you understand it more.
Yeah, it's not the same, is it?
It's not the same. And we always want to make sure it works. Make sure, like, obviously everything's tested thoroughly and everything, but I want to see it properly on a casino. I want to play it on my phone, check it works amazingly in the app, and also have that experience. A bit like a proud parent, really, doing like some wheel spins on it, see what happens.
And I think it's interesting. You talk about math quite a lot, and you hear a lot of developers talk about their math models and stuff. For like, if you had to, what does it actually mean when you're saying math? Is it like you have a bit of paper with some equations and you're figuring out how many you'll hit a 50x win in this many spins, or like, what do you mean math?
So it's not paper anymore, unfortunately. It's massive. Spreadsheets are vast. So the math is basically, I like to think of it as like, if you imagine a roller coaster, and the math is the track. So basically the journey you go on in the game, that is the math. So it's the ups, it's the downs, it's the turns, it's the left, it's the kind of upside down loop-the-loops. All that is driven by the math. And that's what underpins a good game, because the graphics can be great, the sounds can be mind-blowing, but if it's a really flat, dead experience and you don't go on that journey, you won't have fun. And that's what the math is. So it's everything combined. It's the average feature frequency, it's the volatility, it's the average pair of the feature. Luckily, it's not me that does the math. It's our math director. But yeah, that's basically the kind of math of the game. It's what drives the experience.
So it's the kind of the inner workings of the. I suppose in some ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess getting the graphics and the theme together is probably, I would assume, the easier part of developing a slot.
It's all challenging. I'd say the graphics, the theme's quite hard as well, because you think of a theme and then you try and make it coercive and think, what can we do with this? Where can we go? And how can we make it all pull together? But that's kind of done in parallel to the math. So, for example, we've got games in development now, and the math team are working on the math, and the designers are working on the design. And then at some point, it does come together, and you kind of put it together as one. But they are developed separately and separate streams to kind of speed up the process.
So what's your say you have an idea for a slot, you say, yeah, I want to do this today. How long until it arrives in the casino lobby?
From kind of like concept to creation and actually live, probably 10 to 12 months.
Wow, quite long.
Yeah, it's a long process. Just kind of batting around the idea, finessing the idea, working out, because we don't rush at anything. Going back to what I said about kind of like the boutique approach, we really kind of think about it. Is this right? Is this correct? Speak to customers, speak to our tech partners, pitch them the game idea, and kind of go from there. So yeah, we don't do things quickly.
No, so that's good.
It is quality over quantity then, completely.
Yeah, it truly is. It truly is. Everything takes time. You can't rush perfection, which sounds really kind of like rub my own ego, but it's true. You can't kind of rush these things. You want to do it right and do it properly, or not at all.
I mean, like just touched upon a minute ago, there are some game developers that think it's great that they can release 6 to 8 games each and every month. But they are pretty much rehashes of the same game, but just dressed up in a different skin, pretty much. So, and I think your approach has been recognised as well by the industry as a whole. I mean, I've seen just these past few days that you've been shortlisted by EGR for their B2B awards for innovation in slot provision. I think you were telling me as well that you've also been shortlisted by SBC or Casino Beats.
Yep.
Just looking at your site here as well, I noticed that Slots Launch have listed you as one of their top 35 studios as well, which is quite a good achievement in the fact that they are providing over 18,000 slot games. So to get listed on there, so you are obviously doing something right with your approach, and the fact that you say it takes you anywhere up to a year from the drawing board to slot being released. That shows a lot of dedication goes into producing a game that will be enjoyed by us, the slot players, as it were.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's about entertainment. So that's perfectly what you said. So we want players to have fun. That's a big thing for us. So kind of making the entertainment and making players enjoy the experience.
Well, one thing I've noticed on the forums, and that players always ask about, is RTP. Is it a case that back in the day it used to be the game provider that would say, right, this is what the RTP's got to be, you can't change it, but now is it the case that depending on who the operator is, the RTP for a particular game can be different depending on where you play it?
So the industry has evolved a lot in the last couple of years. When we first launched 4ThePlayer, we launched with 97% RTP, which was 9K Yeti. Since then, regulatory changes and economic changes mean that casinos won't always kind of offer something like that and want a choice. Also, casinos naturally want a choice. They're their own businesses. So if we say to them, this is what you're having, they go, oh, I want this. So the way it works is we certify multiple versions. So generally it'll be 2 or 3. And they can basically choose which one they have. We don't hide it. We're very clear about it, and we clearly say which RTPs the game's available at. And we also normally display it on our splash screens as well, so the player can clearly see. And they're generally always got the kind of higher end, but the casino does have the choice about which RTP they take. But once they've launched the game, they can't change the RTP. So they'll launch with an RTP, and that's the RTP of the game.
So even sorry, Alex. Yeah, go on.
Well, that's always quite a common misconception. I mean, you only need to spend a few minutes in a forum. You know, providers have nerfed a slot a couple of weeks after its release, or they've changed the RTP. I don't think most players appreciate the. I believe the certification process is one of the most expensive and time-consuming parts of the journey, if I have remembered that correctly. And to go through that all again, it's just not possible, is it?
Yeah, so it also it's not responsible. So casinos generally won't downgrade the RTP of a game. It's worth pointing out in the UK, players can open a game and check the RTP in every single game. So if a player does ever feel that, they can just have a quick look for themselves and be reassured that it is the same RTP. But what they need to remember is that RTP is done over 1 million odd spins or so. So there's a thing called luck, and they might be having a lucky session or an unlucky session, and also a variant. So they might be, if it's a really volatile game, they might just be on the volatile side of the experience. And if they're not enjoying it, then stop playing, because when the fun stops, it's time to stop.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's all weighted in the house's favour, and it's just a form of entertainment. I saw that when I worked for Ladbrokes, we went over to Dell in Ireland at their big EMEA warehouse, and we basically replicated the Ladbrokes casino setup, and each casino player was given £1 million to play, and we're doing data replication basically. And yeah, every single account that we'd set up, which had 1 million credits in each, were down, and that's gonna be the case because it's weighted in the house's favour. But I think what a lot of players get really narked about with the RTP is that they perceive that they're getting a much lower RTP than what's actually being published, or some operators are being a bit cloak and dagger with the actual RTP. But you've said it out perfectly, the fact that once operator launches a game, they can't change it.
One of our games, once they've launched one of our games, they can't.
Yeah.
I can't speak for other game developers or the industry as a whole, unfortunately, but with one of our games, when they launch it, that's the RTP.
That's good to know.
And I appreciate we're coming up to the hour marks, and I just have a couple more points. Sure. One more about the RTP. This is actually kind of for my own curiosity.
Sure.
But we're used to Play and Go. I think they were perhaps one of the first to offer 97 all the way down to 86 or 87 even maybe. What is what actually changes the RTP? Is it the bone that there are presumably the real sets are different? I would assume, right?
Well, it's basically, it goes back to the math. So it's basically it's a higher margin or lower margin. So you basically take out some of the wins in the game, but it's where those wins come from. So we try and do it to make sure that it's the same experience. So you do still have the same experience as if you were playing a higher RTP or the medium RTP game. So the player doesn't feel, oh, I've been robbed. To try and make it fairer for the player. So we don't take it all from the feature, we don't take it all from the base game. I know some game providers have the view that they should take it from the bonus, so then players won't feel it as much because they won't see it as much. But then we want it to be the same kind of experience, so we try and make it kind of even, try and take it from kind of across the board.
Cool. I'm just quick firing questions now. My second,
Dangerous.
what is 6 Wild Sharks?
Yeah.
Best setup. Best pick.
So 6 Wild Sharks, really interestingly, is just a volatility play. So lots of players are really interested in that one, and they say, "What's the RTP?" And it's like it's the same on every single combination, which does blow your mind a bit, and was great fun getting certified. But all you're doing is changing volatility. So from the top of my head, far left is less volatile. So if you want wins more often and smaller, go left. If you want highly volatile, so less often and bigger, go all right. If you kind of want to be lucky, kind of spread it around.
I think that's one of the most entertaining slots to watch when I was watching streamers play. I mean, it's so funny. Because you basically, Dave, and for anyone watching, you get awarded, was it 8 or however many free spins, and then you can choose to basically pick a sticky wild, and depending on where you pick that wild, you sacrifice your starting spins. It's a really cool concept, and that was one of aside from 9K Yeti, that was one of your games I played most. Very frustrating, but in a good way.
It's just a fun, different way of playing it. Players really enjoy that one because there's all different choices, all different ways of playing.
I just want to say thank you ever so much for your time this morning. It's been really eye-opening and interesting. But before we go, is there anything you can offer up to our viewers as to what 4ThePlayer have got in the pipeline for the next few months?
So we have a Buffalo game. Well, obviously it depends on when you broadcast this, but we've got 5 Wild Buffalo coming, which is a really exciting game. We've taken some mechanics from our existing titles and created a new game, and that one's coming out in May. We've then got another Dream Drop game, which I mentioned, which is the 4 Fantastic Fish Gold Dream Drop, which is cool. And then we've got another 1, 2, 3, 4 more games coming till the end of the year.
Oh, excellent.
So there's lots of different fun things to enjoy coming soon.
Excellent. No, thank you so much, Henry. It's been great.
You've absolutely blitzed through the answers to the questions, which I like. That's my kind of style. But it's always eye-opening, I think, speaking to developers and studios, and especially when you've been a player and the inside workings. I just think it's very interesting.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you guys found it interesting, and best of luck with the site.
Thank you.
Yeah, and my very final question:
Sure.
Were you involved in the Sensible Soccer slot?
Oh wow, Sensible Soccer. Yes. Many.
Were you really?
I was. Yeah. Ash Gaming.
That is the best game ever released. It is incredible. I always
Really?
used to pick I can't even pronounce it, the Greek team, Pathanaikos or whatever.
Yeah. That was a massive blast from the past. And if you remember, I think that was the first ever game to have bonus buy.
That's what I thought. Yeah. And it was really cheap. It was a really cheap bonus buy for it. It wasn't very expensive, and it was just so much fun. Is it still live anywhere?
I don't know. I'd have to check because Playtech obviously own it now. I'd imagine it won't be because it was a Flash game. So imagine when Flash was discontinued in browser natively and everything was converted to HTML5. I'd imagine it wasn't converted.
That's so sad.
I'll have to have a Google.
But if you want Alex's Q4 tips for this year, it's for the player to release a Sensible Soccer slot. With
that product guide.
So much fun, but that's really cool. Yeah, and Yeah, I'm fanboying now. Very awesome. Cool. All right, Henry, Dave. Anything? Or Henry? Anything you wanna?
No, I think it's been great, and yeah, thanks you also for your time.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Thank
Well, yeah.
you.
Thanks very much, Henry. Good speaking to you.